Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Andy Lelock with my co-host Melanie Kitchen. We are from the Western New York Regional Information Center. Welcome to TIF Summit. This is our second presentation of the day by Rob Dunlop. And Rob is a teacher, speaker, and author. He talks about his new book. He has a book called Strive for Happiness in Education. We all need that more than ever. He believes all students deserve to be surrounded by educators who are passionate and love coming to school each day. And Rob is part of the district school board of Niagara. And if you want to connect with Rob, go to at Rob Dunlop EDU for Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and go to his website, motivateedu.com. And Rob, welcome and thank you very much.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. I'm jacked to be here. All right, can I take over? Let's throw up
It's
my.
all you.
All right, man. Thank you very much. So I just want to say how excited I am to be a part of this. This is my life, really, though. Is Canada meets US. I work in an office every single day with Kyle Kitchen, and he lives in America, and he comes over. Here's a couple of my favorite pictures of Kyle and I. And so I feel like this, US Canada thing is just part of what we do, and I'm just so glad I get to be a part of something where we get to share what we're doing on either side of the border together. So I'm jacked about this, and I'll just jump right into it. And I thought I would start off with the idea of my near dad COVID fail. And it all revolves around this thing right here. Now, in the States, you don't have a Canadian Tire, but you probably have a store like this that they always put these ridiculous sales on all the time. And so I get this online flyer and this pool pops up, and it's COVID. I'm scared my kids are going to be bored. I don't know what the summer is going to look like. And I'm like, and it's going to be a hot one too. So I was like, I'm going to get this pool. So I look at the pool and it says it's easy. You just unfold it, construct it, and fill it with water. And I was like, man, I'm not that handy, but I think I can handle that. So total impulse buy. I buy this thing because it's $100 off. I pick it up. But as I go to start the process of putting it in, everyone's like, oh, you bought an above ground pool. You have to put it on sand. And I'm like, put it on sand. Like I never thought I have to go get sand. So I have to order a ton of sand, like a whole yard of sand. And all afternoon I cart this sand into my backyard, and then I get it nice and level, and I put this pool on the sand. And you know what? If I'm being honest with you, I wasn't happy with the way it looked. It was blocking half my view of my backyard. And it really, the frustration really set in though when I stopped to read the instructions. Now I know it's a typical guy thing where like you don't read instructions. So during my break, I'm at this point right here and I read the instructions and it says, do not do two things. You do not put the pool on sand and you do not put the pool on grass. I'd put the pool on both. And so I was stewing and ruminating over this, and my wife's like, it's dinner time. So we're sitting at the table, and I'm just staring at this pool, and I'm getting more and more angry, more and more frustrated. And to the point, as soon as dinner's over, I run to my shed, I grab a shovel, and I start tearing up my grass on another level, trying to level it off. And I don't know if you've ever shoveled sideways, it's ridiculously hard. So I'm fueled with anger and frustration, and I'm working ridiculously hard. And my daughter keeps coming up to me saying, Dad, are you all right? Like, you want some water? And I could tell she was worried about me, but I was just so in that mode where I was like, I am getting this pool on flat ground if it kills me or not. And eventually my wife comes out and she's like, you got to call it quits. Like, this is too much. So I put the shovel down and we put the kids down to bed, and I go into the backyard and I'm staring at this pool. And then I took a couple deep breaths and I realized I have to employ something that I've been working on for the last 4 or 5 years, which has changed my perspective. And I'll get into a bit about how I've been learned that this is important and why I've been working on it so hard. But as I'm sitting there looking at it and trying to figure out like what is a better perspective, how can I make some positives on this? I thought of this. Check out this. I just thought, man, I can have a pool and a beach now. So it's so interesting that as soon as I thought of this, I was so excited. And my wife comes out expecting to see this grumpy, angry human being and sees me all super jacked up. And she's just like, what's going on? I was like, man, wait till tomorrow morning. I woke up extra early. I grabbed that shovel. I tore my grass up, moved the pool. By 1 o'clock, we're having a beach party. And I'll tell you this, when my kids look back on COVID, this will be probably one of their number one memories, maybe even in terms of their childhood. We had such an amazing day, and it all came down to the idea of, creating a positive reality. And this is the thing I've really realized that I needed to work on. And in the past, when I got upset, I would ruminate and it would last a long time. It would really frustrate and stay with me. But I've learned this idea of the importance of creating a positive reality. And I think more than ever, this is an important concept to talk about. So I'll show you an activity that I do all the time. I have a book called Strive for Happiness and Education. This is one of the activities in it, but I also do this when I run workshops, and I have people look back and track their happiness over the course of their career. So this is what my line looks like. And you're probably looking at that thinking, wow, that's the guy who talks about happiness and education. Look at those super deep dips in there. And you're probably wondering what happened. Like, how were you that unhappy at several points in your career? And before I get into this, I want to tell you my favorite book of all time. It's called Peaks and Valleys by Spencer Johnson. Spencer Johnson, by the way, wrote Who Moved My Cheese, which sold like 38 million copies. I think the number one book on Amazon. And so this guy's a great writer, but he talks about this idea of, we're all going to have peaks and valleys. And on those valleys, we need to learn how to enjoy the valley and just stay on those valleys. But the other thing is those peaks are what we got to stay on. The valleys are where we really got to learn how to manage those valleys. It's what we do in those valleys that will kind of determine how long we stay in there and how bad they actually get. And the thing that I got out of it is the idea of those valleys are actually good things in some ways because they teach us some very valuable lessons. So I thought I would just tell you a couple of my valleys and the lessons I learned in it. And I'm sometimes embarrassed to talk about this, but like in this valley right here, it was the lowest point in my entire career. What ended up happening is my administration wanted to make some changes to my schedule. I was very entitled to that. I didn't want to change. I didn't think I needed to change. It caused a lot of issues between us, and to the point where they were going to administratively transfer me to another school. So my superintendent was on the way. It was getting really ugly really fast. And I remember they told me this and then just closed the door and put me in the office. And I remember thinking to myself, whatever, move me wherever you want to move me. I don't care. I'm just going to go there, shut it down, and count the days to retirement. And that's where I got this really gross feeling. And it's just like, I don't want to shut it down. Like, I didn't come into education to count days to retirement and to have no impact. It was the exact opposite reason. And as I thought more and more about it, I said, that was the point where I really thought to myself, I need to change. I need to be open to change. I need to be more agile with what I'm thinking. But also, I need to change the fact that I wasn't looking at other people's perspectives. I wasn't taking other things into account. I was just thinking it from my perspective and what I was choosing to focus on. So it was a huge moment for me because that's actually the conversation. My admin was great, by the way. And we had this conversation that led to me doing some technology within the school and supporting teachers. That led to me going in and becoming a resource teacher for blended learning across the board, which then led to my job now as a technology consultant at DSBN. And I know sometimes you go to tech conferences and we all want to leave with these really cool tech things, but Melanie asked me, like, what do you want to talk about? And I was like, this is what I love to talk about. I talk about tech all day, but when I can talk about happiness and education, it's what really drives me and wakes me up in the morning and gets me excited. So I hope you're all right with the fact that I'm not talking tech today. But this was an interesting climb out of that valley. I learned that lesson. And through that valley, I remember looking back all the time saying, I never want to feel like that again. And so I started to read about how do I maintain my level of motivation? That took a pivot at some point. And I started really reading a lot about positive psychology and finding happiness. And along that journey, I realized it wasn't so much that I wanted to stay motivated, it's that I just wanted to love my job. And then I realized that's the most important thing. And I started to read as much as I could on it and have conversations on it. And that's what ended up happening with regards to a book, and the idea of a book came out of it. But there was a point at the top of that peak right there where I thought I'd figured it out. If you were to ask me on the day I remember presenting at a conference on this, and I was showing it this timeline. And if you were to ask me what it was going to look like, I thought it was going to continually to just go gradually up at that point. And you know what? It didn't. 3 months later, I find myself in another valley, and this was a career-ending valley almost, for the reason that I'd been looking at going to an ed tech company. I was one signature away from signing with them, and another signature away from leaving my board because I was that upset. And it's not really important what happened, but I felt right at the beginning of the school year, I felt disrespected, and I felt, and I didn't feel valued, and I took that and ran with it. I looked for every possible negative situation I could get my hands on, and I just built it into this really frustrating, toxic ball of energy. And the other thing just to point out is, like, there were other members of my team that were upset about what was going on, but no one was handling it as poorly as I was, I would say. And my wife was watching this go on, and it was like 3 or 4 months, and I was getting angrier and angrier. And one day she comes home with this book called Sean Acor, and it really a book by Sean Acor called Before Happiness, and it really talks about the idea of perspective. And this isn't something I ever really thought about before. And in this book Before Happiness, he says this. He says that successful, happy people, which is what I wanted to be, are able to see multiple realities of the same situation. And I'm like, trying to get my head around that is not really, wasn't really, I just couldn't get it. Because to me, the reality was I was mistreated, I was devalued, I was all these things. So I couldn't see how there was other realities. Well, something very interesting happened. The next morning I woke up and looked out my back window, and my eyes welled shut with tears. And if I was to describe it to you, it's like all of a sudden, for 3, 4 months, I couldn't see anything positive. I couldn't see that I worked with some of my best friends in the office. I couldn't see that I was developing skills. I couldn't see that I was writing books and having an impact on the board. All I could think to myself every day was, why did I leave the classroom? And that morning, I woke up and I could see things like the relationships I've developed with Kyle Kitchen and Jim Reschke, and all these great things were happening to me, but I was so focused on that negative piece of my life that it took a lot away from me. And that flush of gratitude was incredible. And I remember thinking to myself, this is it. It's perspective. It's what I choose to focus on, and our perceptions are what creates our reality. Nothing had changed from when I went to bed to when I woke up, except I decided to look at things a little differently. So in my book, I compare it to the idea of getting glasses to, working towards happiness. And I'll just kind of go through that analogy with you of like the process of getting glasses, and then I'll tie it into happiness. So think about getting glasses. What happens? You get a card in the mail or an email or something, and they say, you got to come in for a check-in. So you come into the eye doctors for a check-in, and they put you in front of this machine called a phoropter. And in this phoropter, what you do is you look through it, and they put this really blurred out eye chart in front of you. And then they start switching the lenses. And every time they switch the lens, they ask you, is it getting better or worse? And as you say better and better, it gets clearer and clearer to the point that you can see how you are supposed to see, the way you want to see. So if you're trying to read that right now, it says teaching is the best career if you can see it that way. And I totally believe that. But I believe any career is the best way if you can actually see it that way, because it's our perspective. So let's put this into happiness and how I think these guys relate. The first thing is, I think it really starts with a check-in. It starts you thinking about it. When I do the happiness timeline, or when I'm working with other people, I ask them to quantify their happiness between 0 and 10. It's a very interesting thing. If you just were to ask yourself right now, where am I on a scale of 1 to 10 in happiness? And you got a number, then you ask yourself, am I happy with that? Is that okay? And if it's not okay, you got to be willing to make some adjustments, right? So you're checking in, and then it's about an awareness. When you go to that eye doctor's, I just turned like 43. So like when last time I went, it was the first time I realized that my vision was going. I didn't realize it for the last year. It was starting to go. And I feel like it's like happiness. It can slowly deteriorate over time. And then one day you wake up and you're like, I'm just not happy anymore. So I think if we actually check in and think about these kind of things, it allows us to make those adjustments. It allows us to add routines and habits and things to our lives and ask us, is it getting better or worse? And if it's getting better, we keep doing it. If it's getting worse, we try something else. And once we do that enough, and once we think about this enough, eventually we can come up with, what's our happiness prescription? Just like those glasses are so unique to your vision, so is your happiness in terms of you. It's unique. So I can't just come up here and tell you, these are the things you need to do to be happy in education. I think it's a prescription. I think you need to go out and try different things and play with different things. and see what works for you, because you're entirely unique. Your situation's unique. Your personality is unique. So it's all about that, starting the process of going down that road and being willing to make changes, because there's really nothing more important than finding more happiness in your life. I'm going to show you this video. I hope it's not too choppy. I've presented at WebEx before, and it's a little choppy, but I think you'll get the ideas behind this, and then we'll kind of talk about it at the end. It's really good. Yeah, I super enjoy this one. Check it out.
I will never forget that cup of coffee. Well, a couple of years ago, I was traveling when my schedule worked out on Christmas Eve. I thought the airport was going to be a zoo, so I got there a couple hours early. It wasn't crowded at all. So for me, that means coffee. So I get down into my terminal D, and I see the sign. I get in line. So it's my turn to order. And I was greeted with this very warm and sincere welcome. This woman said to me, "Hi, my name's Lily. What's your name?" I said, "I'm Ryan." She said, "Ryan, what can I make for you today?" I said, "Well, I want a grande pumpkin spice latte." She said, "You want whipped cream on that, don't you?" I said, yeah, I want the whipped cream. She said, "I'll tell you what I'm going to do." She said, "I'm going to make it extra hot, load it up with whipped cream, sprinkle a little nutmeg on top. You're going to love it." I said, "Sounds great." She said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Cleveland." She said, "Are you going back to Cleveland to spend the holiday with your family?" I said, "Yes." Now, at this point, I start looking around for the camera, right? I mean, I'm trying to get a latte. So I move down the line, and the conversation continues. And she's funny. She's asking me questions about my family and our holiday traditions. She's laughing, and I'm laughing. And she hands me my drink and says to me, "Ryan, have a safe trip back to Cleveland. Go create some extraordinary memories with your family. When you come back through the Minneapolis airport, I want you to stop here and tell me all about it." As I get my drink, I start walking away, and I stop and I look back at this woman, and I think to myself, it's Christmas Eve. Most people would rather be anywhere else in the world than serving coffee in an airport. Not her. It was like she was meant to be there. And I couldn't help myself. I had to go back. So I did. I walked back. I said, "Excuse me, Lily." And she jumps around. "Ryan, is everything okay with the latte?" I said, "No." I said, "The latte is perfect. I just had to come back and ask you, what is your secret to making such meaningful connections over serving coffee?" Well, she corrected me. She said, "Ryan, I'm not serving coffee. I'm pouring happiness into people's lives." I said, "You're pouring what?" She wants to be happy in her life. She wants to be around happy people. So she chooses, even on Christmas Eve, to smile, to have fun, to help people, to just be happy. It's interesting. When I met Lily, she would have had no way of knowing this, but I was pretty heavy in the heart and had a lot on my mind. About 3 months before that holiday, I got a call from Mom. We got some really tough medical news about Dad. It was a terminal diagnosis, and we knew we probably weren't going to have a lot of time. So I was sitting in that airport on Christmas Eve, not in the best place in the world. I will never forget that cup of coffee.
Yeah, I love that video so much. Every time I watch it, I think of Kyle, because I don't know if you know Kyle Kitchen, but he loves his coffee. And I think, man, I'm bringing happiness to you, and you got your coffee. He's one lucky man, right? And especially when he's got his Timmy's. Yeah, look at the smile on his face. It's just the two things I think educators need most in this world is that coffee and happiness. And I also think what I love about that video is the fact that it's her perspective. It's and he says that you choose to be happy. We have more control over this than we actually think we do. There's a study out there that says that 50% of our happiness is determined by genetics. And I know for some of you that might not be a good thing. You might be really upset right now, but let's show you the good news. The good news is that only 10% of our happiness is determined by genetics, is only determined by circumstance. So that, like, when you think of that what actually happens to us is only 10%. It seems really low till I saw this part of the stat that says that 40% of our happiness is determined by the stuff we control. And when I look back to those valleys and I look back to the times in my life where I was struggling the most, I realized something. It wasn't what happened to me that made me so unhappy. It was every decision and choice I made after that happened that had the greatest impact on my overall happiness. And I find that number of 40% a number that's very encouraging, and it really motivates me. And when I wrote my book, the idea behind the book was, how do I help teachers get the most out of their 40% of happiness in education? How do you do that? How do you help them build that in? And because I think there's nothing more powerful than an educator that loves to come to school every day. So not only is it good for the educator, but it's also amazing for the student. So this is my book, and I want to tell you a little something to kind of segue into the next part. Is when I wrote this book called Strive for Happiness Education, Strive is actually an acronym that stands for Students, Team, Routines, Innovate, Viability, and Extraordinary. And when I wrote the first chapters on students, approximately 25 pages. Second chapter on team, approximately 25 pages. Third chapter on routines, there's no way it was going to be 45 or 25 pages. There's no way it was going to be 45 pages, to be honest. So I called my publisher up and I said, listen, I got an issue. Like, I thought all these chapters were going to be similar in length. I said, but I realized that this chapter is going to be way longer than that. Is that okay? And she goes, is it that important? I said, it's easily that important. So when you look at the book, the routines is actually over 100 pages in length, because I've come to the realization it's what we do daily that has the greatest impact on us, and how we build that into our lives. Here's a really, really interesting quote. I read this in a book. I'll show you the book in a sec, but it says, winners and losers have the same goals. Now, yeah, I know we have losers has a really negative connotation. I think I was called that a lot when I was growing up, so I'm a little sensitive to it. But when I read it, I felt kind of shocked about it. But when we really think about it with this next sentence, it totally makes sense. But champions have the best systems. So let's think about this. Like, the idea of, like, when everyone who goes into, like, say, a sporting event to compete or a competition, or everyone's goal is to have an amazing, impactful career or to win or whatever. But what separates? It's the systems. It's how do we build it into our lives? It's our habits. It's our routines. How do we consistently do that? And this comes from one of the best books I've read in the last 2 years by James Clear called Atomic Habits. If you're ever looking into a book that really gets you thinking about your life and your routines and habits, this is the book. It's fantastic. And he has, in the second chapter, he talks about, it's really my favorite part. He talks about this. He talks about the 3 phases of behavior change. And he says it's like the first phase is outcome based. So for instance, I want to run a marathon. What do you want? What is the goal? What results do you want to achieve? But once we move beyond that, it goes into, like, well, how do we do that? What's the process? So how do we build that in? Are we running in the mornings? Are we splitting between running and walking at the beginning? Are we doing long run, short run? Like, there's all sorts of things within that process, but how are we tying that into our day? But here's where he really got me. I remember when I read this while I was listening to it while cutting the grass, I was like, I stopped cutting the grass. And I was like, oh, that's it. And finally someone was able to articulate to me, and I was so impressed. I'll show you what it was. He says the third phase of behavior change is this. It's identity. It's, what is your identity? What do you believe? What is your self-image? How do you see the world? This is so important. And the thing that really got me, what he said was this, is he says, too often we go in the wrong direction at the beginning. So what we do is we say what it is we want. So I want to run a marathon. Whereas the question we should be asking ourselves is, who do I want to be? I want to be a runner. Like, so, and I think of how powerful this in education is the idea of, who do you want to be as an educator? Who do you want to be as a family person? Who do you want to be as a person in general? Because when you can integrate it into part of your identity, it just becomes something naturally you do all the time without thinking. And so when we're looking at finding more happiness, we want these things to become so ingrained in us that they become parts of our lives and actually part of who we are. I have this thing that early in my career discovered. This is one of my best friends, Neil, and he's actually a really successful businessman. But back in the day, we'd go to cottages and we used to play a lot of chess and stuff. And I remember him saying to me, like, how do you mark kids nowadays? And I was like, what do you mean? And because he's like, well, how do you mark them? And I was like, well, at that time we were using rubrics. I know we use things other like single points now, but at that time everyone was using a 4-point rubric. And I said, well, like a level 1, I explained to him, like, you're way below the expectations set out. But I said a level 4, you're going above and beyond the expectations. I'm not sure why this stuck with us, but for the last 20 something years, every time one of us does something that the other thinks is impressive, we comment on it. We say that's level 4. But in the mix of those years, level 4 became part of both our identities without us even thinking about it. And so what a level 4 identity is in our mind is the fact that we're not competing with people. We're trying to go above and beyond the expectations that we set for ourselves. So for instance, if I do video editing and I do green screen, the next time I might try to up it one level. And the idea behind this is constantly striving and pushing yourself and just continually progressing. Tony Robbins has a wicked quote. He says, progress equals happiness. And he's so right. The moments we are the most engaged and most satisfied are the moments that we're progressing, the moments that we're learning, the moments that we overcome obstacles. This is where happiness is to be found. But throughout my career, I've fallen into this complacency trap where I get all my lessons and units in a line and I just want to roll on that and do it every year. And then when I reflect on it, I'm like, this is actually not what I want to do. This isn't making me any happier. But when I switch it up and I learn something new, I'm excited to teach it again. So I think for educators, the idea of always pushing ourselves and always trying to go above and beyond our own expectations is a really powerful identity to develop. Here's one of my favorite videos of all time by Simon Sinek. And people know Simon, he does the gold circle. He's got a really good line. It says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. I think the why is so important in education, to never forget why you became a teacher. But with regards to habits and routines, this is one of my favorite all-time videos. Hopefully it comes through clear to you guys. It's got a crazy good message. Check it out.
If you were to go to the gym, right? It's like exercise, right? If you go to the gym and you work out and you come back and you look in the mirror, you will see nothing. And if you go to the gym the next day and you come back and you look in the mirror, you will see nothing, right? So clearly there's no results, can't be measured, it must not be effective. So we quit, right? Or if you fundamentally believe that this is the right course of action and you stick with it, like in a relationship, I bought her flowers and I wished her happy birthday, and she doesn't love me. Clearly I'll give up. You know, that's not what happens. If you believe there's something there, you commit yourself to an act of service. You commit yourself to the regime, the exercise. You can screw it up. You can eat chocolate cake one day. You can skip a day or two. You know, it allows for that. But if you stick with it consistently, I'm not exactly sure what day, but I know you'll start getting into shape. I know it. And the same with the relationship. It's not about the events. It's not about intensity. It's about consistency, right? You go to the dentist twice a year, your teeth will fall out. You have to brush your teeth every day for 2 minutes. What does brushing your teeth twice a day for 2 minutes do? Nothing. Unless you do it every day, twice a day for 2 minutes, right? It's the consistency. Going to the gym for 9 hours does not get you into shape. Working out every day for 20 minutes gets you into shape. So the problem is we treat leadership with intensity. We have a 2-day offsite. We invite a bunch of speakers. We give everybody a certificate. You're a leader, right? Those things are like going to the dentist. They're very important. They're good for reminding us or getting us back on track, learning new lessons. But it's the daily practice of all the monotonous, little, boring things like brushing your teeth that matter the most.
Yeah, I love that video so much. I love how he talks about how it starts with a belief, and it starts with the belief is what allows you to commit to it regularly. But the quote I love, he says, is it's not about the events, it's not about intensity, it's about consistency. And I think this is where we go too wrong too often, is we get these ideas, these outcome-based goals that we want to do, and we're like, we throw everything into it so intensely, and then we don't get the results we want, and then, you know, it just peters off. Whereas we need to look at these habits as being, how do we build these consistently? Finding things that you can build consistently into your lives. And that's what my book's about with regards to education, is how do you build happiness consistently into your teaching day? So that's like embedded strategies, right? Because if we can make it consistent, it's going to have an impact. Here's a really cool quote I want to read to you. This quote was posted in the San Antonio Spurs locker room when they were at the peak of their franchise. And it says this: when nothing seems to help, I go and look at the stone cutter hammering away at his rocks, perhaps 100 times without as much as a crack showing in it. Yet at the 101st blow, it will split in two. And I know it was not the last blow that did it, but all that had gone before it. And when you really think about that, is that's sometimes where we fail, is we go at things with consistency sometimes, but then we don't go long enough. We don't see that every time we do it, it's having an impact and it's having a positive, it's moving us in the positive direction. And eventually, if we do it long enough, we will see that impact. But I think it's this one really sticks with me because I've went down roads before and probably quit just a little shy of being able to see the true impact that it was going to have in my life. So in my book, I go through these 6 different areas of routines, and I call them happiness routines. And I don't have time to go through them, so I'm just going to blast through the 3 that have the most important impact on me since writing the book. And these are the ones that have stuck. These are the ones that I've built into my life. And these are ones that have, for me, have had the greatest impact. They might be different for you, but for these really worked. And the first idea I'm going to pull out of the mindfulness and gratitude chapter. And just so you understand, is when I wrote this book, the routines section took me almost 2 years to write because I was living out each one of these 6 categories till I felt ready to write the book. So say I was going to write on mindfulness and gratitude, I would research it, read about it, talk about it, interview people about it, listen about it. I would do whatever it could, and then I would practice it. So these chapters were taking me usually 4 months or more to write. And so when we look at this, the mindfulness is really tough for me because my brain's scrambled all over the place. But what I really learned in that chapter, what stuck with me, is the idea of savoring. When this book was getting closer to publish, people would come up to me and say, I bet you can't wait till this book comes out. And then I learned something. I said, no, actually, I can't wait to design this cover with a cover designer. No, actually, I can't wait to get feedback from a professional editor. I can't wait to and do all those things because I've been so guilty in my life of doing a task and looking to the next task before I actually could enjoy that task. They say that we spend 47% of our time distracted, our life's distracted. And that's really sad. So I'm just trying to be a bit more in the moment. But the one that's had the greatest impact on me, the greatest impact of everything I've learned is the idea of gratitude. And I think sometimes I feel weird because like if you meet me, I'm like this big, crazy 250-pound man. But like, this is truly like, I would never guess this could have this type of impact. But the idea of gratitude daily, and in the chapters I was researching and doing things like gratitude walks and journals and all these things, and then I found it. Being a technology consultant, I'm always on my phone. And how do I make that device meaningful? Well, this app did it for me. And this is the best app I've ever had on my phone. And it transforms my phone from being something that, takes my attention out of living life and actually puts it back in a very interesting way. So every night I get this thing at 10:10. It says, what are 3 things you're grateful for? I'll tell you a really quick story. I have trouble talking about it, but so I was doing this, and it does a streak. It measures how many days you've been doing it in a row. And I was in the mid 90s, and I was looking forward to getting to 100. And I wake up one morning, and I find out that my mom's really sick. And by the end of the day, I find out she's terminally ill. And it was easily one of the worst days, or I imagine it so far, it is actually the worst day of my life. And so many emotions going through my mind. Like I was angry, I was upset, I was sad. And, I get home that night, and it was a super long day. And I get this notification that says, what are you grateful for? And this is the post I wrote. And I can't read it. It makes me so emotional. But I talk about my mom and I talk about my wife stepping up, and a friend of mine had come down to see me. And, I reflected on the next day that even on the worst day of my life, I can pull out 3 positives. And this has been a game changer for me to realize that. And I've been doing, my mom's still alive and she's still sick and struggles, but ever since that day, that really helped it stick. And I realized that gratitude app was actually helping me cope with this situation. And currently I'm over 500. I think I'm 512 days today that I've been doing gratitude in a row. But it's how do you get things that stick and change your perspective and build into your lives that you truly enjoy. And that's one example that I have. The next example I like to talk about, I'm just going to go quick on this one, is the idea of positive intake. This is something that I'm really passionate about. When I was in my angriest, saddest, like not happy phase, what I was doing was consuming a ton of negative media, watching news all the time. It's coming at me through social media, notifications. I was just inundating myself with negative media. And then as I wrote the chapter on this, I began to realize how toxic it is. 90% of news is negative, and they do that off this thing called negativity bias, because that we are actually groomed to pick out negatives. So that's why we watch the news, but it's not good for us. It actually skews our perspective of the world. I read a stat once that said if you swap out 3 minutes of negative media in the morning with 3 minutes of positive media, they show 6 to 8 hours later up to 27% improvement in mood. So when you look at that, it's crazy the impact this has on people, but we just don't realize it. My morning routine is entirely different. I don't look at news. I don't look at what's going on. I have a gratitude folder in my iTunes. I play this music to myself. I jump in the car and I listen to audiobooks and I listen to podcasts. I listen to people that inspire me. And I'm very conscious. It's not that I don't watch news. It's not that I don't know what's going on in the world, but I'm really careful of that ratio to what I'm pulling in. If you are struggling, especially during COVID, really reflect on your media habits. And I think you might realize that, making some simple changes in there might bring a lot more happiness to your life. The next one I want to talk about is the idea of socialization. Right, I got this stat here. It says those who have best friends at work are 7 times likely to be more being engaged in their job. They're better engaging customers or students. They have higher quality work. They're less likely to get injured. And I feel this. I work with one of my best friends, Kyle, every day, and I love what I do. I love coming to work. I love jumping on now, and it's a totally different world. But every morning we jump on and I get to talk to one of my best friends, and it's about investing in those relationships and making those relationships a priority. When you look at the research on that, it's incredible that happiness is really one of the, and relationships are really one of the most powerful ways to find happiness. And, in my book, I write all about that research, but I want to show you the one thing that's had the greatest impact on my relationships that I try to blend into my life. And it's this idea I call random acts of recognition. Came out of the ideas of random acts of kindness, but it was too complicated for me. I was making it too complicated. I wasn't completing it as much as I'd like. So I came up with this idea of random acts of recognition, which just strips random acts of kindness down into a very simple form. It goes like this. When I have an authentic thought about somebody, I act on it in the easiest, quickest way possible. So if I'm sitting on my couch tonight and a thought pops into my head about someone, I pick up my phone and I text that thought to them. I'll tell you something. I was at a tech conference once, and this girl was presenting, and she was really unconfident. But her idea was ridiculous. She had this idea in there. It was like ridiculous. Now, the old Rob would just walk out and be like, great job, see you later. And so, but this is what I do now. Part of my identity is I'm going to recognize that. So at the end, I just walk over and I say, hey, that idea was ridiculous. And she started crying. And I was like, I'm not a hugger. I didn't know what to do. So I was like, what's up? And she's just like, no one's ever recognized that. No one's ever recognized the hard work I've been putting into this. And I was like, that is so sad. But we don't. If you recognize someone randomly, it's like they're shocked, right? And so I do this professionally within my job. I do this within my family. But I'm even doing it in grocery stores now. I'm walking up, and if a cashier's got a wicked personality, I'm like, instead of just thinking, wow, that's a great personality, this company's very lucky, I look at the guy eye to eye and say, man, authentic thought out my mouth, easiest way possible. You have a great personality. You're this organization so lucky to have you. And you should see the shock in people's face. But I think it's everyone's responsibility. We often look up at administration and the top level to create the culture, they set the tone, they make you feel valued, they make you feel appreciated. But I think it should be everyone should take on that. I think you should be talking coworker to coworker, recognition of students, recognizing admin, recognizing anybody who's doing anything that you find inspiring or impressive. I want to challenge you to do it just for the next week. Every time you get an authentic thought, zing a text, zing an email, shout out on Twitter, do it and watch how you feel. It brings so much happiness, but not only that, it builds relationships that you probably didn't normally have access to. So the last thing is I want to say in my book is there's a chapter, a very short one, on just being extraordinary. Hey, watch this goldfish. It's really cool. See that? See that? It's kind of fun. So when we're talking about being extraordinary, it kind of goes back to that progress is happiness. And, I pull this slide up because, I think it's important to mention this. We're all going to have valleys in our career, especially now. This is a really tough times on people. So we're going to have valleys, but it's in those valleys right there. How do you manage that? What decisions do you make? Are you willing to make changes? And what lessons have you learned in those valleys that will allow you to get on the peaks? The other thing is, don't stop striving to be on a peak, right? Do not stop striving to be extraordinary. There's so much happiness to be found in that. There's so much happiness to, not settling for mediocrity. Mediocrity actually stands in the Latin for middle of a rugged mountain. And so when you think of like coming up the slope mountain and just in the tree line, it's nothing special. This is what we expected in our careers. We wanted to come in and have these extraordinary, fulfilling, impactful careers. So I want to finish off by saying this, and then we'll do like a Q&A if there's any questions that you want to ask. Is, your students deserve it. Your students deserve an educator at the front of the room that love what they're doing. They do. But just as important as that is you deserve it. You deserve to come to work every day and love your job and feel fulfilled. And you deserve, when you finally retire, to look back on your career and say, I'm glad I became an educator. So I just encourage you to make happiness a priority in your life. I thank you for spending this time with me. And yeah, if there's any Q&As, I really appreciate that. But yeah, I'm very appreciative of just having the opportunity to speak about my passion today while standing in my living room with my computer on a couple cases of beer. So it's been a blast. So thank you for coming. All right, is there any Q&As, or am I just talking to myself, or what happened? You feel so alone.
You're not alone. You're not alone. We're all here.
Yeah.
Mike Dresick is asking for the quiz.
I'm working on Nearpod, buddy, so I will, no, just kidding. As long as I know you're asking for a quiz, I know you're involved. So yeah, no, you're good. No quiz today. It's summertime. You get off early.
Art says, thank you. This was very inspirational.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. I'm glad you can get something out of it. I get inspired doing it. Like Kyle, I talked to Kyle and I was saying like, about doing this. And I was like, I will do this in the Shoppers Drug Mart to like an old lady if she lets me talk about it. So I just love talking about the subjects. And yeah, if you ever want to contact me or communicate, talk about it, I would love to do that. So. Any other questions, Mel, or?
Wait time.
We just got to wait them out?
We're giving them some wait time. They're processing. There's a lot to process.
Yeah, no one ever asked questions after this. They just look. I talked a couple of days ago at my buddy's winery. They were just like, how many more years to retire? I'm never retiring. Very interesting. If you ever look into retirement, it's very interesting. Retirement came out of von Bismarck or something in Germany. And what it was the life expectancy was 68. And so they looked at it and they said, well, we'll let people retire at, like, they want to bring younger people into the workforce. So they picked the age of like 65, and randomly it stuck globally. But the interesting part with regards to happiness is when they look at the blue zones, which are the happiest people in the world with the highest life expectancy as a culture, one of the interesting things is the one that they kind of look at the most is Okinawa. They don't have a word for retirement in their vocabulary. It's not part of what they do. They look at this thing called ikigai, which is your reason for being. And the idea is why they don't talk about retirement is you just don't give up your purpose. You don't give up your reason for being. That's what it is you do. But in Western culture, it's become a thing like we're striving to retire, whereas we should be striving to have a purpose. Another interesting stat with retirement is it's the second deadliest year of your life in terms of percentage. So birth is the highest year and retirement's the second. And, I believe it has a lot to do with people just lose their purpose. They just wake up one day and they don't have the structures and the habits and the routines in place. They don't have that reason to kind of get excited and be happy. And it's sad that it happens, but you work all your life. And, there's, I read this other really interesting book, and it said like, when we talk about work-life balance, it's sad because it's kind of saying like the work part is the negative part and the life part is the good part. So if we overwork, then we're not getting any of that good stuff. And whereas this guy says, I can't get his name right now. He says, it's such a negative way to look at it because our work is part of our lives. So when we're separating them, you can have a fulfilling job, you can have a fulfilling career. It doesn't have to be like, well, the only good part of my life is when I get off at 3 or 4 o'clock. It doesn't have to be that, but it takes an incredible amount of effort, thought, awareness, and being agile and willing to change if you want to have that style of career. Not everyone gets it. It's just an opportunity. But in every profession, there's somebody who loves it. And so I find that very motivating to know that within every profession, someone could really find that if they wanted to. That is a crazy stat, eh, Matt? Or Mike? I'm not just a pretty face, man. I know some stats.
Data.
So we going more time? Wait some more people out?
No, I think we're good. I think we're good.
Talk all day. You know.
I know. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate you sharing all of your happiness knowledge. Rebecca says thank you. Yeah, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Have a great day, guys. Enjoy the weekend.
We'll see you tomorrow, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say tomorrow is our panel. So we should have everybody on and chatting, and we'll have questions. We would love questions from our audience as well. Hopefully all of our speakers from this week will be joining us. Kyle Kitchen and I will be moderating.
I got some hard questions.
And loving it.
Yeah, Kyle can moderate. He's good.
Yeah. Okay, well, we will see everyone tomorrow. Thank you all for joining us today.
Have a great one, guys.
Great job, Rob.